Welcome to the Action for Access podcast. Action for Access is a project that is supported by ARISA. ARISA stands for Advancing Rights in Southern Africa. The project is implemented by the Namibia Media Trust in partnership with the National Federation of People with Disabilities in Namibia. This is going to be a series of podcasts. Some of the topics that will be discussed during the interviews will be access to information, whether it's in the media space or any other public setting, access to education or inclusive education to be exact, and also gender participation and representation of people with disabilities in different entities that influence policy making. Welcome to our Action for Access podcast. Today we are joined in the studio by Mr. Paul Nanyeni. Mr. Paul Nanyeni is a teacher by profession. He is the director of the Namibia National Association of the Deaf. So Mr. Paul Nanyeni, he is a deaf man, and joining us in the studio with him is his interpreter here, Miss Olga. She will be translating for us when Mr. Paul answers the questions. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Paul Nanyeni.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
All right. So today's topic is on education and early childhood identification. So these two are interlinked. In terms of education, we want to understand how our system is structured to become inclusive for learners with disabilities. And also in terms of early childhood identification, we want to understand when a child is born with a disability, what are some of the steps that our government or the stakeholders involved, what are those steps that they take to ensure that these kids end up in the right schools and that they are given the equitable opportunity to thrive as a child. I will get directly into my first question, Mr. Paul Nanyeni. This one is based on the Ministry of Education's policy on inclusive education. So we are aware that this policy exists. I want to understand, in your opinion, and also your experience as an educator, do you feel the implementation of this policy has been effective thus far?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll explain a little bit about inclusive education. It's a very interesting topic. Yes, Namibia truly is correct, using the right way when it comes to inclusive education and the implementation of inclusive education. However, I think the Namibian government is not fully ready for that. Why do I say so? Because we need different people with different disabilities, like physical disability, like visually impaired, intellectual, and also other different disabilities. Mm-hmm. And for all of them to be included in one system, they have different approaches and ways. And now the policy on inclusive education says all the children should be in whichever or wherever they can be in Namibia. But now we do not have all the resources to accommodate these children. In the past, there have been discussions on inclusive education and the different stakeholders about the policies. They're very good. Yes, they're good. But then the resources and other things, we are not ready. For example, just to show you an example or explain an example, we have deaf children at the school, okay? They start and then they finish grade 9. Now, after that, they have to move to another school, which is an inclusive school, where they rely on interpreters. And sometimes we do not have full interpreters to be there. They might be there, but they're not trained fully to accommodate or to interpret for these learners. The resources are not there also when it comes to teaching. Another example that I can talk about is in Windhoek. For example, we have HTS for the visually impaired children, where they move to when they finish a certain grade at the visually impaired school, where they have got the brailing system. Now the deaf children will go to a school, but then we don't have all these resources. We don't have full support for our interpreters, meaning the inclusive education is not fully implemented on the scale we want it to be. So maybe first we need to focus on planning on how to reach certain goals. And when we are ready for that, then we can implement this inclusive education. Sign language interpreters is growing, it's true. But then the government has to look for places where they have to put interpreters, they have to plan on how much to pay them. A lot of people are interested in learning sign language and they are thinking, wow, we could help with inclusive education. But now the challenge is here. We start interpreting and then there's no budget. How do you pay them? The interpreters suffer. So I feel that we still need a few more things like planning to have it fully equipped. And then after that, we can talk about all disabled people involved in this inclusive education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paul. That was such a comprehensive answer. You basically just took us through what inclusive education was supposed to be, but you alluded to the fact that the implementation of such a policy, Namibia is not ready for it in terms of infrastructure, in terms of professionals trained in educating people with different types of disabilities. And you did mention HATIES. I am a product of HATIES myself. Although we do have the Braille system, we do have a focal person within the school. The other teachers who were teaching the other subjects, science, math, computer, they were not trained to work with a person with a visual impairment. Hence why the education, it was not as of the quality that we expected from that. You also touched a little bit on, for example, deaf children. I want to ask, in your perspective, like from NNAD side, as an OPD and as a civil society organization, what work have you done in ensuring that a child who is born deaf finds the right school, that the parents are informed on how to properly care for the person, for the person with who is deaf, whether it's even in terms of maybe finding hearing aids or going for regular checkups at hospitals, whatever the case may be. Because if you identify somebody's disability and their needs at an earlier age, this will improve their life further going forward, especially with education. Because now this kid is properly cared for in terms of health, and then this person is taken to the correct schools. They are taken through the correct, and maybe you can also tell us a little bit about organizations such as Clash. Are they still existing? So basically my question is, in terms of early childhood identification, what measures are there that NNAD has taken? And maybe also, if there are any, what measures have government taken?
About early identification is very important. It is very important when it comes to inclusive education. The children with disabilities, for example, some stay in the village or different places, for example. Now, if a child is born deaf, they need school. For example, they're 5 years old or so, they go to Clash, which is in Windhoek, but we only have one center. What about the other regions in Namibia? There's nothing. It's only in Windhoek that we have this early identification center. For example, in Keetmanshoop, we have children that have to stay at the hostel in Windhoek school, which is really difficult for parents to send their children at such an early age.
Of course.
Yes. So if we could have a lot of different centers in different regions, that will be good. We feel as if now there's a lot of abuse because all the children just need to come to the capital, which is very difficult. Some parents withhold that and say, no, my child will stay at home until at least 10 years old, and then they're ready to go live at a boarding school. Now, when they start, they're so old, they're not at the right age. And now the developing of their sign language is really little. Now, this deaf child, the first time they get to school, they're introduced to sign language. And now the parents of the deaf child, for example, are at home, they communicate in a language like what we call home sign language. So it's not the same when they go to school and then they come at home, there's just no communication there. Now, when they come to school, here we have sign language. And the child is so confused, like, I don't know. And their career is left behind. They have to learn sign language. Then they have to learn to read and write. And the whole process is left behind. So later, academically or career-wise, they do not achieve what they need to achieve. They suffer a lot. So we now at NNAD are working towards awareness about access to education to all children with different disabilities, especially the deaf. We're working together with the government here and there. Yeah, we're trying our best there with negotiations and talking to make sure that all the regions in the country have an early intervention center. From Katima, a child has to come to Windhoek. There's no primary school there. Imagine that. Or for example, we talk about inclusive education. Now we have it, but the resources are not there. So there's no interpreters there. So how can these children be included in that? They sit in a class and there's no benefit there. So my opinion is I think the government should open up different centers in different regions where children that are younger than the age of going to school can benefit at the early intervention center, and then later they can move to the primary school where they can now continue with their learning process. In this way, the child will be ready, they've got the language, and not coming when they're so old and it's very difficult for them to master the language. We don't want them to be delayed when it comes to education. So NNAD wants all the parents of the deaf children and other maybe disabilities to go or other OPDs, for example, to see how to help these learners and also to know how to help the children. For example, if a child is deaf, born by hearing parents, they quickly learn sign language. Mm-hmm. And when they grow up, they're signing, whether at home, whether at school, wherever, the sign language is on par with what is required. Their siblings can sign, and then these children can sign well and communicate. How can we also help? For example, in the afternoon, the children go home. They find it difficult to communicate. The challenge that we have, for example, are parents of the deaf, they can't sign. Now the child is born deaf. The parents are just there looking at the child and then, ready, go to school. And that at home, there's no language acquisition. When they go back home, no communication. At school, they sign. Back at home, no communication. So you see, we don't expect the children's sign language to improve. So we need that relationship between the parents and the school. So they start now having a means of writing, copy this and write, show to the learners. But the child doesn't even understand. They can't read, for example. Or maybe they don't even show their children, or sometimes they need to say, okay, this and this. Okay, then the child understands. Yeah. So you see, because of lack of communication, that barrier that's there, it's impossible to help. And then they just say, okay, the children are ignored.
Okay.
Yes. And then we feel in the end, it's impossible to have full inclusive education when it comes to that. So we encourage all the parents to learn sign language. If you have a deaf child, NNAD teaches sign language. Same as a clash here at the school in Windhoek. Parents learn sign language in the afternoons on a Saturday. This helps the parents to communicate with their children. Please don't leave the children behind, or the other siblings come with them so that they can communicate. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Paul. I actually like what you said about how it is important for the parents to learn sign language. Very, very, because even when it comes to teaching the kids fundamental, just the basics that the child have to know, things like manners, whatever it may be that parents need to incorporate in their children at a young age. The parents of deaf children, the hearing parents of deaf children, will not be able to communicate because they do not have that sign language, the basic sign language. And then, like you said, they establish sort of a way to communicate in the home sign language that you said, sort of an informal sign language, whereby when they go to school, there's another sign language taught. So this kid gets confused now when the kid comes back home. It's a situation that two different languages in the different parts of their lives. Another important thing that you also mentioned was the schools, the lack of the early intervention schools. You said we have one in Windhoek. Now imagine, even if everybody had to come from from other regions to come to Commerce region for this type of education, are we saying this school is not going to become overwhelmed? And I know we have a lot of deaf children and a lot of deaf people in general in the country. So even this school will not be able to accommodate all of them. So I'm sure there are some that are being sent back even. So, and this is something that us as civil society, OPDs, together with government, we seriously need to come to the table and then discuss ways in how we can prioritize early intervention centers for deaf children, and not just deaf children, also any child with a disability in general. Because I think these issues are cross-cutting. They face the same issues as well. This also leads me, you touched a lot on sign language, the importance thereof. We recently learned that in South Africa, they have moved or adapted to officially recognize sign language as a language within South Africa. So now they have Xhosa, they have Zulu, and the others, and then also sign language, right? So why do you think, in your opinion, Mr. Paul, has Namibia not followed suit in the same vein? And I know this because us OPDs, together with obviously the lead of NNAD and other civil society organizations plus other stakeholders, have been advocating for sign language to become recognized as a language, right? This would also make it easier for universities, schools, to adapt or to ensure that even a person who is not deaf, somebody who can hear, they are required to at least learn the basics. Why do you think Namibia has not followed suit in recognizing sign language? What do you think is maybe some of the bureaucracy barriers? Is it at government level? Are us as OPDs not moving fast enough? Are we not aggressive enough? Maybe you can just touch a little bit on that one.
Okay, that's a very good question. Firstly, I would like to explain the Convention of the Human Rights for people with disabilities. Namibia was a signatory already from the year 2007.
Yes.
They signed already. We're done. We have signed. But the Namibia, when it comes to the international groups of people to support people with disabilities, Namibia is in there. It's support fully. We applaud the government for that. Well done. Great job. But the challenge that we face, the UNHC for people with disabilities, they say Namibia must recognize this. It's fine. The policies are good. We have them. They are all there. We're following it fully? Mm-hmm. No. It's like we put them under the table and that's it. So now the international countries are looking, wow, Namibia has got all these policies. But then the challenge is the implementation-wise. It's not there. Namibian Sign Language is not recognized yet. For example, it's very interesting for us at NNAD to always, we go all over the countries at international meetings. When it comes to people with disabilities, we meet up there. And then they ask, oh, is it permanent already? Yes. But now the challenge is here. The Namibian government has informed about these meetings, the discussions that we've been having, but the recognition is still not there. And also, I feel that there's some misleading information, or maybe the government does not understand fully. The paper says it should become an official language, which sign language should become. But the government said, nope, it's different. It cannot become, we only have one official language, which is English. We're like, yes, we understand. We only have one official language. But now the question is, does this mean that now, for example, if we have other languages in the country like Kwanyama, Ndonga, Nama Damara, Herero, these languages are in the schools. Yes, they are there. Kwangali, Silozi, all these other languages, they are there. And now the question is, we see, for example, the important documents that we have, for example, Namibia's constitution. We have amended some few things for different languages. The changes have been made. And now you think, okay, this changes or amendment like in Kwanyama is added there, but then sign language is not there. Now we need recognition of this language, meaning that Namibian Sign Language needs to become a formal language, because currently it's not a formal language. The policy is like it's under the table, and Namibian Sign Language is just put there. We have all the languages. Namibian Sign Language, it looks as if it's there, but the planning strategy and this document is still not working together. There's no cooperation there to change, to make this language formal. It's like, okay, maybe there's translation there, Kwanyama is there, Herero is there, translation of different documents are there. And then sign language, it's just there. And number two, the help now there when it comes to sign language, it means now all the schools must choose, for example, a language. We have brothers and sisters that could be interested, cousins that could learn sign language in their schools, where they could choose sign language there. Yeah. Then a person can say, I don't want Kwanyama, I would like to learn sign language to become an interpreter or to communicate with my family. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. When it comes to the university, there's a program to teach sign language. People could learn sign language and then become interpreters. Very good, it's there. There's access to information? Not really. It's not easily found for deaf people. Another point is also when it comes to planning and organization. Namibian Sign Language, to become a formal language, the planning is still going at the pace of a tortoise. The interpreters are needed, but there's no budget to reach that goal. Also, supported the university program when there's a deaf person attending there. It's a struggle for a person to have someone to help them. For example, research. There's research going on. How do you do the research? The deaf person doesn't even know, for example. So the research on paper is very good. Documents are there. The dictionary, for example, to make a dictionary to learn sign language. It would be nice if we have a video there for sign language dictionary where we could just upload and then the deaf watch, where everything is signed out in sign language. So, which should become countrywide. But now, sign language is not on the same level with it. A deaf person is there. It's like, there you go, it's finished. It's very few people that have access to media or access to NBC or certain programs that are there where there's interpreters. It's one that you could find. So now Namibia needs to have access to sign language all over the country. For example, the South African government, we applauded for recognizing sign language and accepting it. It's a responsibility for them and they're supporting it, which means that UN Charter for People with Disability is accepted. So it will be nice if the Namibian government, together with the OPDs, with NNAD, and all of them meet together and discuss how to support sign language to be accepted as a formal language. And if we come to the table and have all these discussions, I believe this is our starting point to make this become permanent and become an official language in Namibia. Just like other countries, we want to be like them. And the last question, please, that I have, government, please, I urge you, we request you to make sign language an official language. Please, full rights as other people. Please, the Namibian government.
Yes, indeed. I think you touched on on a very important document, which is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So Namibia is a signatory, and we have rectified it 4th December 2007, meaning we were supposed to be compliant of this document. Many times the problem about international treaties, some of them do not have repercussions, sort of accountability measures when it comes to countries that are not fully compliant, because compliance does not mean formulating a document or writing something nicely in black and white, like you said, and then putting it under the table. I think compliance also includes implementation on the ground. So if we are saying that everybody should have access to information, everybody should in the schools should be conducive for everybody in terms of communication, how then do we fail to recognize sign language as a language officially? And this also would hinder education. Today, in certain somebody that starts late, a deaf child starts school late, they end up learning sign language only at a later stage, right? But had it been officially recognized as a language, this is a language they would have learned even on the street, right? So thank you very much, Mr. Paul, for shedding light on our education systems in Namibia, how conducive they are in terms of accessibility and inclusivity for people with disabilities. As the director of the Namibia National Association of the Deaf, you also touched a lot on the importance of sign language and how it could be a driving factor to ensure that the deaf child is properly assisted or properly included within the education system, not only from early intervention center level, but also primary, secondary, and even tertiary for that matter. We cannot have children in schools studying something and only being limited to certain subjects because they feel like maybe science is too difficult to interpret to sign language, for example. So unfortunately, time is not our friend today, Mr. Paul. But again, I would like to thank you for making time to chat with us. Mr. Paul, like I alluded to earlier, is a deaf man. He was communicating with us in sign language, and that was interpreted by the audio of his sign language interpreter, Miss Olga. Thank you also, Miss Olga, for being here. Hopefully, in the future, we can expand more on this topic.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for inviting me here. And I'm very pleased that I could give my opinion. I'm very happy. Thank you so much.
This has been the Action for Access podcast. For more information on the Action for Access project, check out Namibia Media Trust, Action Coalition Namibia, and the National Federation of People with Disabilities in Namibia across all social media platforms. Once again, this has been your host, Orben Muluti.